I'm Rachel, I'm moderating. This is Chris Yost.
Hey, everybody.
You may know him from his work in comics. He's written dozens at this point, series for Marvel, DC, and a creator-owned series for Image. He's also one of the main brains behind the Marvel animated universe, especially in the last few years, including the two best Marvel cartoons ever, Avengers, Earth's Mightiest Heroes, and Wolverine and the X-Men. He just finished wrapping up Thor 2, The Dark World, on which he was one of the primary writers. And now he's here.
Hi, thanks for coming, everyone.
So I think we're probably going to do about 35 minutes of conversation and then 15 of Q&A. Does that sound okay? Do people have a lot of burning questions?
Can everyone hear me without the microphone?
Actually, yeah. Why don't people... Are you guys going to be okay recording without the mics?
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Then we will use microphones.
Alas. But yeah, if folks in the back want to maybe move up. Welcome to. So, first of all, Chris, you got started... I think, especially in comics communities, we think a lot of people who work in cartoons and in other sort of licensed extended universe stuff as often starting in comics and branching out from there. And you actually took the opposite arc. Can you tell us a little bit about how you came into Marvel and the Marvel universe?
Yeah, I'm actually from Michigan, way back in the day, and I used to produce TV and radio commercials for like car commercials, right? So I do like new battery for $29.99, like that kind of thing, right? Can everyone hear me? So it was a cushy job. It was a great job, but it wasn't the most spiritually fulfilling job I've ever had. So I'm like, all right, if I can produce a commercial or whatever, I can go out and maybe try to produce something else, like a TV show or a movie or whatever it is. And so I ended up going to graduate school in a film business program and realized pretty quickly that it wasn't for me. But we had a guest speaker that was like the guy who wrote Armageddon. And he seemed like a cool guy, right? So I'm like, all right, I'll try writing. And I grew up reading comic books and all that all my life, so I was a big fan of that kind of thing. So I tried writing a couple of screenplays, and I knew Marvel had offices out in LA, so I called up. I just cold called them and said, hey, do you guys need any help? And at that time, Marvel was like 3 or 4 people in an office, and like making deals with Sony and Universal and stuff like that. And they did need help, as it turns out. So I sat in Stan Lee's old office at the Marvel offices in Los Angeles, and made copies and answered phones and filed, and it was great. And on my way out, I just left a copy of my script on every desk, and a few months later, I got a phone call from Craig Kyle, who was in charge of animation at the time, and he said, "Hey, do you want to write this TV episode with me for X-Men Evolution?" So that was my first professional writing job. I wrote an episode of X-Men Evolution called X-23, and that led to other jobs like, The Batman and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and stuff like that. And then at a certain point, then the character of X-23 is like this little Wolverine clone girl. They wanted to bring her into the comic book side. So we actually got a call and said, hey, do you guys want to write like the origin story of X-23 for the comic books? And that's how we kind of got into comic books. And that led to New X-Men, which led to everything else.
So when you mentioned this morning, when you wrote the X-23 series, you sort of had an original sense of the character, but she'd appeared in comics since then that had kind of changed the direction. How did you end up, where did you end up, how did you end up reconciling those?
Well, so Craig Kyle, who created the character, had like a fairly elaborate like origin and backstory for her, and it was really intense. If anyone knows the character, it's not like a happy story. It's like if like the Weapon X program happened to a child, and it's pretty rough. So for the cartoon, obviously, which is for younger audiences, we kind of not lightened it up, but made it a little less intense. But we were able to bring all that back into the comic book for older audiences. She appeared in a book called NYX. As a young girl who more or less was a prostitute, right? So it's like that's not necessarily where we were going with it, but it's not that it didn't make sense. So we brought her back into the X-Men and had her do more standard X-Men-y adventures. But I mean, it's a great character because there's like this darkness to her, and you can tell all kinds of stories with her.
So with Wolverine and the X-Men, and with another show that you worked on, Iron Man Armored Adventures, those are both shows that take adult Marvel characters and reset them back in high school. And that's something I think of as sort of associated with a particular era. Is there anything? Are those shows that you've specifically looked for, or that you've just sort of ended up attached to?
More likely that I just kind of ended up attached to them. I mean, with X-Men Evolution, it was my first job. So if they said, "Hey, do you want to write a show?" I'm like, "Yes, I do. I do want to write a show." So it was really that was a show where they'd taken the X-Men characters, made them like in high schoolers, and which really isn't that far off from Stan Lee's X-Men. I mean, they were all kind of young teens at the time, but I mean, a lot of the animated shows, like comic books, is a fairly small group of people kind of guiding the destinies of these characters. With animation and movies, like you have a lot more opinions, you know, from executives and studio heads and all whatnot, saying, well, audiences like kids, audiences don't like kids, audiences like two-parters, audiences like nobody's right and nobody's wrong. It's just decisions are made. You know, it's like if that one guy making decisions thinks the X-Men should be younger, then generally the X-Men are younger. You know, so you kind of roll with it. With Iron Man Armored Adventures, it was a TV show based on Iron Man. After the movie came out, they're like, we need an Iron Man show. What if he's a teenager? And, you know, it just like, it kind of takes a life of its own. You're just like, really? But Tony Stark is like kind of an alcoholic, womanizing guy. How do you do that as a teenager? And you realize you can't, and, you know, things happen. But, you know, we try to get the essence of Tony Stark through the character, whether he's 5 or 50, you know.
You mentioned continuity, and I want to go back to that because Wolverine and the X-Men is, I think, one of the most continuity-intensive Marvel cartoons, maybe ever, but definitely of the recent series. And in an era where things tend to be sort of one-shots and shown out of order, it builds on this incredibly complex continuity. For anyone who hasn't seen it, there's a lot of time travel and a whole lot of extremely complicated buildup of causality over the course of the one season it aired. How do you balance that, and especially how do you balance creating a separate, really complex continuity while you're working in the already sort of main Marvel universe? How do you keep those apart?
Did anyone watch a show called Lost? All right, Lost is kind of the example of what Wolverine and the X-Men was to a certain extent, whereas it was like a 26-part episode, right? I mean, if you walked in the middle of Lost, there's a lot of catching up to do. There's a lot of homework to do. Like, I'm a guy who started watching X-Files in season 3, right? So I mean, like I'm the kind of person who would go back, look at every episode, you know, figure stuff out, do my research and all that. But that's kind of advanced viewership, right? So I mean, it's like you really have to like love it to do that much work outside of just sitting in front of the TV and watching the show. So Wolverine the X-Men, it's a complicated show. I mean, time travel. Anytime you bring time travel into a scenario, it gets complicated, right? But this show was kind of built on the idea that for 26 episodes, you'd be seeing stuff happening in the future and stuff happening in the past at the same time. And there's one guy kind of like talking in between them. So, I mean, it not only was it a complicated, like, heavy continuity show, but we just, because we are gluttons for punishment, decided to make it that much more complicated with time travel. But I think that if you watch the whole thing kind of as a whole, everything really kind of pays off. Like the two guys that kind of constructed, like the masterminds of it, Craig Kyle and Greg Johnson, like they really did a great job. Like everything pays off. Everything kind of made sense at the end. But the problem with the show, and it's a glorious problem to have, is like if you come into the middle of it, you could be fairly lost. So that's what we always struggle with in animation, in anything, is that you want to tell a complicated, not complicated for the sake of complicated, but you want to tell the story you want to tell the story you want to tell. And maybe it's a complicated story, but it has to be accessible. Like if you sit down and watch it, people can't be confused because that's not going to really make you enjoy the show. You're just going to be lost, right? Not the show lost, the actually lost. And with the movies too, it's like we were making Thor 2 right now. Do you need to see Thor 1 to understand it? Do you need to see Avengers to understand it? Like these are questions we wrestle with. Like we feel like everybody on the planet at this point has seen Avengers, but you can't count on it. You can't count on them remembering like little aspects of it. Like, but you don't want to be the guys like, all right, we're in Thor 2, here's what the hammer is, here's who Dad is, here's who everything is. You kind of want to hit the ground running and just, hope that you're telling a clean enough story that people will kind of catch up. Have you all seen Avengers? All right, see. So you're our people.
Talking about continuity and translating stories in every one of those series, something I've consistently seen and been impressed with is the ability to take extremely long, complicated, and often really iconic arcs of comics. So things like Ultron, the Dark Phoenix saga, the entire concept of Apocalypse, and kind of distill them to really, really change them, kind of take them in what-if directions specific to the animated or to the movie continuities, and really kind of distill them down without losing a lot. When you go about adapting or taking elements from a really definitive arc, one that a lot of fans are going to recognize, what considerations go into that? How do you make that work?
I think we always try to look at the essence of it. Like, what do people really respond to? Why do you like this? Like, with Apocalypse is a great character. He's like the first mutant who's been always there, and he's going to eventually rule the world and has horsemen, and there's a lot of cool things to him, too. It's like, but do you need to know that one day in Tibet he found a celestial spaceship and then armored up from celestial technology? And that, kind of pushes none of that speaks to the core of Apocalypse. That's not who he is. That's not what he wants. So as long as you can stay true to what that character is and what they want, some of the set dressing of it doesn't matter as much. Like, as much as I personally love the fact that he found a celestial spaceship, because that's awesome, not totally necessary to an interpretation of Apocalypse, So, I think with all these characters, with Iron Man, with Thor, with Captain America, with Hulk, in those movies, you kind of find what the core of that character is, and the rest of it you don't have to be as slavish to the details, as long as people can look at Cap and recognize that's Captain America, and he acts like we think Captain America should, and probably has a shield, we're going to be okay. But you'd be surprised at how many meetings you're like, does Thor need a hammer? And we're like, yeah, he does, and it's amazing, like, how often that comes up.
Were there any alternatives suggested?
So,
really curious.
Yeah.
Really?
Sure.
Like what?
The Thor sword, of course. Well, and a lot of it is sadly, like, there's obviously you sell a lot of toys, right? So if you can have Thor with a sword, that's an extra toy you can sell. Iron Man is like the perfect toy character because you can have 42 different action figures of Iron Man in different suits, Thor, pretty much has his hammer.
Can there be variations on the hammer? Like, is there space hammer, lightning hammer, underwater hammer?
No.
Thank God.
No, but they do all that. Like, Thor with power shield. Like if you go to the toy store and look at the shelves, so there's Thor with some crazy stuff. But the day that you kind of hit Thor on this Thor cycle, you realize what business you're in.
I want to go back a little bit.
He should have a chariot with two goats. That's what he should
totally
have.
should. Tooth gnasher and tooth grinder, best goats. Going back, you read a lot of Marvel comics, and you were a fan going in. When you're adapting and when you're translating stuff between media, and even when you're going back and writing it, how hard is it to distinguish between the parts that matter and your favorite parts? What resonates with you personally?
I'm married to somebody that does not read comic books, and she's kind of my touchstone. So I basically, like, if she digs it, I know I'm on the right track. Like, basically, what general audiences latch onto, and there's a good chance that nobody here is the general audience, right? Because we all generally love this stuff. Like, whether we're into the details of it or not, we have a passion for this that other people necessarily don't. It's like the pop cultureness of it is growing. It's like our numbers are growing, but it's complicated stuff for people just walking into it clean, right? Like the fact that Thor, is a Norse god who has a magic hammer and can fly by spinning it like a helicopter. Like, that's a lot. That's a lot for a normal person to kind of deal with, So we make adjustments. Like, he's not necessarily like a mythological god. He's like a being, very long-lived being from another galaxy that comes here not via a rainbow bridge, but through a wormhole. Because generally people can understand, oh yeah, wormhole. Like, I get it. That's a real thing, and we can understand that, Like Hubble telescope, like in Thor 1, it's like Hubble came up a lot because people know what Hubble is. You're looking across the galaxy, and that's where Thor and his people live, So I mean, I think we try to ground it for the norms, you know, like that can walk into this and kind of understand it. But the fun of like the inscription on the hammer, you know, like the fun of it is you know, putting in some of those Easter eggs for us that we love. But I mean, at the end of the day, we have to make regular audiences care about these characters. Like, if you don't care about the character, no matter how awesome or exciting the special effects are, the action is, the visuals are, if people don't like Thor and want to spend 2 hours with him, then it's over. Iron Man is the best example of this. Even if Tony Stark in those movies never put on his armor, you would, not you, but people would probably like the movies anyway because Robert Downey Jr. created such a great character. He's a cool guy and I want to hang out with him. Like Cap, for being like as stiff as he kind of is, like he's just so good. Like you want to know that guy and hang out with him because he'll always have your back and he's great. You know, it's like Thor, like arrogant and headstrong and just like, you know, obviously probably good looking too. Doesn't hurt. But you know, it's like you would hang out with the Avengers because they're cool people. So that's kind of what we.
You talked about, you know, iconic moments in those touchstones, and I feel like we're sort of in an era where we're seeing superhero media taking two really different routes. And one is kind of the trying to ground it in the real world and the dark and realistic and gritty stuff. And one is sort of just earnestly embracing the ridiculousness of it. And there's stuff in the middle, but it seems to sort of align longer between one of those two things. What defines superheroes as a genre and as an appeal and just as an idea for you?
You know, I think to me, it's the modern day mythology. Like these are the stories of, you know, like not necessarily gods amongst us, but DC Comics has a little bit of that. Like Superman, Wonder Woman, Flash, Aquaman. These are like the modern pantheon of Greek gods, you know, and they tell these, you know, like mystery play type morality tales. You know, it's good versus evil. It's very mostly black and white, and Marvel has been pushing, you know, against that. I mean, the stories are more complicated, but at the end of the day, it's, you know, good versus evil. And I mean, I think that people were always going to respond to that kind of thing. But I mean, more importantly, I think that it's a good time. Like, these are fun movies. And I mean, I think there's a lot to be said for going to the theater for 2 hours and just having fun. You know, going on a ride. You know, it's just like, it's a popcorn flick to a certain extent. And I mean, like, we can, you know, talk about theme and character and all these things. But I mean, at the end of the day, we're trying to entertain you. And that's, but as to why superheroes are kind of taking off, like, in a huge way. I mean, they're the biggest movies in the world now, which, you know, is still kind of stunning to me because it's, you know, things come in cycles, and this cycle has really been taken off. Thank goodness. You know, I think at the end of the day, we're in kind of a worldwide kind of, it's a little grim out there. There's a lot of war, there's a lot of bad things happening, there's a lot of unhappiness. And I mean, I think that superhero movies are aspirational. They speak to the best in us. And I mean, I think that people in general want to believe in the best of us. And I mean, the Avengers and Captain America and Iron Man, they're people trying to be better. And I think that people respond to that.
You spent a few years in the Marvel Writers Program, and this is, for those of you not familiar, a program basically about looking at properties with the potential for development into other media. And we've seen some of what's coming out of that, but given your experience in that, given your comics background, if I were to hand you, you know, unlimited budget, carte blanche to make whatever you want, what are the stories you'd want to tell and what are the characters you'd want to focus on?
You know, a property called Power Pack. And Power Pack is a story about, you know, 4 siblings who basically get superpowers and have to save the world and all that. So, I mean, I think the thing about comic book movies now is that there's so much of it, you kind of have to start exploring other things. So, I mean, like, I just have that one particularly. But there are, you know, movies like Chronicle. I don't know if any of you saw Chronicle, but I mean, that's just kind of a different way now to tell a superhero story. So, I mean, not only just superheroes, but I mean, like, people with powers. Like, there's shows coming out left and right, like the Tomorrow People. Like, we are kind of now inundated with it. But there's a good part of that and there's a bad part of that. The good part of it is now you can tell more stories. Like, people kind of have a base acceptance. Superpowers. All right. That guy can lift stuff with his brain. All right, I'll go with that. So you don't have to do as much of the heavy lifting now, that it's kind of part of the culture. So you can kind of hit the ground running on different kinds of stories, like Chronicle, you know. Looper is another one. It's like not only was it like a time travel story, but people were weirdly telekinetic in it, you know. So I mean, I think that you look at like mobster stories, right? Like gangsters, like you don't have to explain a lot about gangsters now, or the mafia, or Godfathers, or any of that, because everyone knows it now. Like, it's now just an accepted thing. And I think that superheroes are now to the point where people are just like, all right, superheroes, what do you got? The challenge then, of course, is to show people something different. Like, there's only so many times you can show a guy hiking up to Tibet to learn how to be like a superhero, right? So the onus is now on us to show you different things. Marvel, in particular, is very mindful of this. So, I mean, not only are you going to get Captain America 2, Thor 2, Hulk 7, you know, whatever it is, you're gonna get things like Guardians of the Galaxy. And whatever you think you know about Guardians of the Galaxy, you're not ready, because it's crazy. Like, I am a hardcore comic book fan. Like, I know all this stuff, and they started telling me what it was about, and I'm like, really? Like, I was so like amazed that they just like went for it so hardcore. Like, they're going for it. So, you know, it's a risk. Is the thing. Like, it's a risk, but it's, you know, if it pays off, it's going to pay off big. Like, you're going to see like Ant-Man, and Kevin Feige, I know, is really serious about Doctor Strange. You know, so you're going to see it start to broaden. Like, it's not going to just be superheroes. It's going to be, you know, like, we always look at the Marvel movies as, all right, it's a superhero movie, yes, but this one's the superhero disaster movie. This one's the superhero monster movie. This one's the superhero political thriller. This one's the superhero James Bond movie. It's like, we want to give you something different and something new with each experience. So it's, as a genre, superhero isn't necessarily the genre, right? So it's what kind of movie is it in and of itself? Like, if that guy didn't have powers, what would that movie be? So
that's a lot of breadth, but one direction that we haven't seen Marvel go, and that's been rumored on and off and repeatedly, and I'm going to put you on the spot and ask about rumors, is a movie with specifically a female-fronted protagonist. And a couple names have been bandied around: Captain Marvel, Storm, Black Widow, spinning off of Avengers. Is that something that we should feasibly expect in the next few years? Or
yes.
That you can say?
You should expect it. You should demand it. You should get on the internet and demand to see these things. Marvel's very aware of it. They have characters like Miss Marvel, or now Captain Marvel. You know, they have minority characters like Black Panther that are primed and ready and waiting. You know, the worry is you're going to put it out there and no one's going to go. You know, it's just like, do we have the appetite for it in this room? I know we do. I know this can be a movie. Outside of this room, it's a little, I think that in comic books, they've been doing it forever. X-Men, like, how many strong female characters are in there? You know, it's like Black Panther, to me, is the Batman of the Marvel Universe. So the creators have an appetite for it. The fans have an appetite for it. We just have to convince the rest of the world. But specifically at Marvel Studios, and I cannot speak for Marvel Studios, but I mean, we're doing things like the little Marvel one-shots, the little shorts. There's one coming out on the Iron Man 3 DVD called Agent Carter, and that's a female-led story about, you know, the formation of S.H.I.E.L.D. You know, it's great. Like, she's a great character. She kicks all kinds of ass. It's, you know, it's coming. We have creators like Joss Whedon. Joss Whedon can't put a pen to page without creating a strong female character. You know, so I mean, he's amazing, and I mean, if you've got guys like him and fans like you pushing for it, it will happen.
Okay, I think we're going to do like one or two more and then open the floor to questions. Let's see. I'm going to go back to Thor: The Dark World, because that's coming out pretty soon, and I suspect that's at least part of what people are coming here hoping to hear about. Can you tell us a little bit about it, how it's different from the next Thor movie, or from the previous Thor movie, and where it's taking that universe?
Thor: The Dark World is coming out November 8th in theaters everywhere. How many people are intending to see it? Excellent. It is the continuation of the story. It takes place not only after Thor, but after Avengers 2, so we get to kind of catch up on the events of Thor and the Avengers. As we know in the first Thor movie, and we'll remind people very briefly in the movie, that the Rainbow Bridge, Bifrost, basically was broken. Thor had to smash it to save people. And so Asgard was cut off from the rest of the universe, and now Asgard is a very important force, like they're like the United States military. They're kind of all over the place, keeping the peace, right? So once that happened, they were cut off, and the universe started going bad, right? So when we pick up the movie, now that they've retrieved the Cosmic Cube, the Tesseract thing, they can power it again or do whatever they need to do, and Thor has been spending all of his time like going from planet to planet, you know, saving people and restoring order to the 9 realms. And then it kind of catches you up with, you know, Loki and Odin and all these guys, but there's something going on Earth, and that kind of leads us into like the main story. We have a villain named Malekith. He's a dark elf from the realm of Svartalfheim, aka the Dark World, because people can't say Svartalfheim. And it hopefully is everything you want in a Thor movie. What do you want to see in a Thor movie?
Beta Ray Bill.
Except for that. Everything you liked about the first one. It's like Jane Foster's back, Loki is back. It's, you know, hopefully lives up to the promise of Thor 1 and just gives you something bigger and better.
Okay, final one before we open up. You've come from comics into cartoons and movies, back into comics, back and forth. And I think a lot of people move between them or go from, or I feel like at this point cartoons and movies reach a far, far larger audience. The Marvel Universe, especially in comics, is so continuity heavy. What would you recommend as jumping on points for folks who are mostly familiar with it through other media?
Which media are they familiar with?
Movies, cartoons, you know, places to jump
So
into
if
the
you
comics.
wanted to pick up a comic book today
Yeah.
and start. Marvel is doing a thing recently called Marvel Now. So they've been starting a bunch of new books that generally all start with a number 1 and are usually a pretty good launching place. So I mean, anything with like a 1 or a .1 is always a good place to start. I mean, you know, Avengers is kind of like the crown jewel right now. So I mean, if you kind of want to know what's going on in the big Marvel Universe picture, Avengers is a good place to start. But I mean, like, there's a ton of good books out there, and it's much like we were talking about how like each of the movies is a different genre, like political thriller or disaster movie. Like every book kind of has its own flavor. So I mean, a lot of times it's like finding a writer that you really kind of like and just kind of like following that writer too. It's very, what we try to do is really provide something for everybody. So if you like a certain kind of story, hopefully there's a book out there that kind of like, you know, scratches that itch. Everybody is very welcome to pick up Scarlet Spider. I heard that that's an amazing book. And then again, like January, February, March, expect a whole bunch of new books coming out. So that's always a good place to start.
Okay, I think we're going to open things up to questions. I haven't actually been to any panels previously. How have they been handling that? Are you using the mic or just raising hands and yelling? Are you guys going to be able to pick up sound for that? Okay.
I'll repeat the question.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, questions. If you've got them, raise your hand. Yellow vest.
So you just talked about Scarlet Spider, and I know that that's nearing its close, which is very sad for me. But in the last issue, is that the culmination of like all you wanted to do, or is there something you wanted to do farther and further along with that, and then it just kind of ended?
It definitely kind of ended, but there are stories that I still wish to tell, but there are stories that, how can I phrase this? You are sad now. Maybe in February you'll be less sad. Look, the Scarlet Spider is a book about like the weird clone of Spider-Man, right? Like nobody really expected it to go on that long. And then once it got past issue 3 and it seemed like people responded to it, like I sat down and like ridiculously made like a 5-year plan for it, right? So I'm an optimist, you know? So there are definitely stories that are still to be told. And I mean, it's going to wrap up. You're going to feel like, all right, there's 25 issues of the story. I felt like I got a story, you know, and you're not going to be left hanging on a lot of stuff. Except one thing.
Does he still wear the hoodie?
What?
Does he still wear the hoodie? That's part of the original costume.
No hoodie.
Aw.
No hoodie. All right.
Okay. Yeah. Let's go for it.
You have been writing a little bit of Superior Spider-Man.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So, did you have any input into the whole Doc Ock thing? And how do you like writing Doc Ock as Spider-Man?
Well, no, I did not have any input on it. In fact, when I got the job, they're like, "Hey, do you want to write this Spider-Man title?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I do. I love Spider-Man. He's my favorite character ever." "All right, we'll give you a call in a couple of weeks. There's something going on." I'm like, "Great. All right. I like exciting things going on." And then when I got the call, they're like, "Oh, by the way, it's Doc Ock's brain in Spider-Man's body." Oh, okay. Well, you roll with it, I suppose. But it's definitely a completely different character. My challenge in specific was I was already writing a Spider-Man book with a different kind of edgy Spider-Man, you know, who's more violent and blah, blah, blah. So it was like now I have two of those, basically. So I had to kind of come up with a way to distinguish between not Spider-Man 1 and not Spider-Man 2. So challenging, but, you know, it's like Dr. Octopus is just this incredibly arrogant, you know, guy. And Kane, who's this clone of this is why regular people kind of struggle with some of this stuff. The imperfect clone of Spider-Man versus the brain swap Spider-Man, you know, it's like some people's heads will explode as they listen to this. But, you know, I think we were able to give them each their own unique voice, and luckily Scarlet Spider was in Houston and all this stuff. So it's been fun.
I just want to know what you think it kind of do to your brain to go from the superhero world that you're used to writing Ender's Game.
Good question. Ender's Game, my brother's favorite book of all time. Like, he loves it, right? And like, you want to do Ender's Game, and I knew the book. I mean, I'm familiar, but it definitely was a different challenge, because what I wanted to accomplish more than anything else was really just not mess up. You know, because I know that people love this book. If I trash it, I'm going to get crucified, right? And up until the very last issue, I did okay. So, I mean, like, largely it was an experiment in, like, how can I really just kind of bring something as truthfully as I can to a different medium. And, I mean, I think that I did it, you know. But, I mean, it was, at the end of the day, all these characters are in this fantastic world. You know, like him jumping around in the battle room with no gravity and just being as super smart as he was. I mean, he's like a little superhero, and Bean's like a little superhero, and they all kind of like are doing their like crazy Ender's Game thing. It wasn't that different, but I mean, it definitely had its own dramas and challenges. But I mean, like I'm proud of what I did for sure. Yes.
When it comes to, I guess, working with like production companies and stuff like that, you know, they kind of are notoriously famous for screwing up stories when it gets brought to screen or things like that. What you talked kind of about the challenges of bringing comic books to movies and making it for everybody on top of just fans. Was it like working with production companies when, you know, they don't quite understand the nerd of some storylines and stuff, and trying to get that
It
around that?
it becomes my job to educate them. It's like, you know, the best I can do is everybody's got an opinion. Everybody thinks nobody's out to make a bad movie. Trust me. Everybody wants to make the best movie that will be seen by the most people. But I mean, like, things come up. It's like, does Thor need a hammer? And you realize that they may not understand the essence of the character, and it's our job to kind of like be like, well, here's why it does, and here's why you need to sit down and listen to my 20-minute spiel on what makes Thor. You know, but I mean, like, largely everybody that's in it is in it to do something great. You know, so I mean, it can go off the rails easily. Trust me, and you've all seen it. You've all seen the movie, and you're like, what? Why would they do that? You know, but everybody has good intentions. I mean, Alec Baldwin told this funny story about every movie is like you're getting on a boat, and the captain of the boat's like, we're going to Fiji. Fiji's awesome. You're going to love Fiji. And then midway through the sail, you're like, we're not going to Fiji, are we? You know, it's like, it happens, you know, like sometimes things go off course. But I mean, like, I think that as more people like us get involved in the creation of these elements, and like we get more involved, like we'll have more fans kind of like in the trenches too. It can go the other way too, though, where you've got somebody that's so hardcore into the fan that they can't kind of see the forest for the trees. And, you know, it's like, you know, it's not, and they focus on some of the details that aren't as important, and kind of like, things get messy both ways.
Do you think that's changed a lot from when
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we've seen superheroes make $1 billion. We've seen superheroes make $50. You know, it's like we've seen the bar at this point. It's like we know how good they can be, and so now everyone's kind of held to that bar. Like, trust me, coming out after, like, when Iron Man 3 came out, Avengers had just set the world on fire, right? So everyone making Iron Man 3 is terrified. You know, it's like we have to be as good as that. Thor 2, we're in the same situation. It's like we have to be great. Marvel is a studio. Yes, it's a studio that makes 2 movies a year. They all have to be great.
If they do make a movie just about Loki as the villain, would you be the one to like do the script and everything?
You never know. I mean, hopefully they'd ask me. I would love that. Loki would love that. Trust me, Tom Hiddleston is a huge fan of that character and loves the fans, and like he's just Loki's a great character. And if you're worried about Loki and Thor 2, don't. He represents.
I also have one more question. What about, like, what's your favorite thing about Loki? What actually puts him out there for you?
Because he's not black and white. You know, he's like a complicated character. Like, he's got an actually pretty decent reason for being angry. You know, it's like he was kind of messed over. Like, his dad lied to him all of his life. You know, he's now, you know, when you realize that you are the monster in the closet. And if you look at his motivations in Thor 1, it really wasn't that bad. You know, it's like he wanted to show his dad that he could be a great king. His dad promised him the throne. Like, you were both raised to be kings. He just didn't realize that he was going to be the king of the Frost Giants, you know? So, I mean, like in Avengers, like, he kind of just, like, snapped just a little bit. It's like he's going to be king of Earth by conquering it. And then in Thor 2, you're going to see it kind of evolve. Like, a lot of Thor 2 is just like, well, what does Loki really want?
I've really enjoyed all the animated stuff. My kid and I watch all of it. And something that every once in a while there'll be a line or a moment that just keeps coming back for like a month. I'd hear my kid playing Legos and he'd be like, "It's like a frost giant's head on a baby's body." He loved that line. And that was, do you have any that really stuck out as like your key like moments or lines or anything in any of your books? Or
That's one of my favorites, actually. It's like anything Wasp says in general, like I was always a fan of. She was my favorite character. You know, half the lines, if I've stolen it from, like, you know, like the old Ultron, we would have words with the line. I feel like there's several comic book creators I owe beers to.
That was the panel before this one. It's
That's
Kurt
right.
Busiek Spotlight.
And so, I mean, like, it's, you know, you just try to have fun with it, like I do anyway. Like, I try to bring a little element of fun because you're there to have fun. Superheroes are fun, you know, and if you saw MODOK, you'd be freaked out, like, because he's just this weird giant head with little legs, and it's just crazy, right? So, you know, we try to kind of address that and have fun with it, you know. It's like, in that episode, it's like you get to team up Wasp and Thor. How often do you get to do that? That's great.
I've got a quick one I want to throw in, which is that I've been reading some of the old X-Men cartoon, I think, broadcast standards notes. How much of that did you have to deal with on the series that you were working on? How much of that is there specific? And was there anything really surprising that you ended up having to change?
No, like I purposefully kept Avengers pretty clean because I really wanted it to be like a show that kids and adults could both enjoy. You know, it's like comic books don't have to be the way they are. You know, it's because we're the new branch of writers that they grew up with it. They're fans and they're bringing a very adult take on comic books. But it doesn't have to be that way. And like Avengers was kind of an effort to show, like, you know, like they could be fun for all ages to a certain extent. Did we ever get? Yes, there's one word that I couldn't use. Which I didn't even know the origin of the word, and it's a word that I always use. It was scumbag. And if you go on whatever site, you look up the meaning of that word. I apologize for saying that in front of someone right now. But it has a fairly adult meaning, and I wasn't aware of it. And I learned through broadcast standards that I should not use that.
I think we've got time for one more question, two. Is anyone else keeping track? Okay, let's say two.
Okay, do you follow characters series where your characters have like graduated from your hand?
You know, I do. Like all the new X-Men kids I love. I love those kids. And I assume that I'm going to write them again one day. So I try to follow and I can keep up and, you know, like I can then address, you know, their current status quo. I think Avengers Arena is pretty fun, you know, unless your favorite character just died, and then I apologize. But yeah, you know, it's like I don't love them because I wrote them. I just love them, you know. So I mean, I'll read them in anything, you know. Do I disagree with them? Things? Sure. And there are probably people that disagree with what I've done with other people too. You know, it's like part of the joy and the tragedy and the triumph of a shared universe is that different people are going to bring different things. What kills you is do it better than you, and you're like, oh, yeah.
One more.
So you're talking about a strong female lead. It's been confirmed that Katie Sackhoff is coming into the Marvel universe, but we don't know when yet.
I do not believe that's been confirmed. In fact, in an interview that I read, she said that she had actually not met with Marvel people, that it just comes up a lot.
I heard last week.
Really? Your sources are better than mine, then. I would love to see Katie as Captain Marvel, for sure. I think she's great. Like Starbuck. Yeah, Starbuck is one of my favorite characters in recent history. Katie's great. I saw her as Dina Pilgrim, too, in the Powers comic book. I mean, I think, you know, she's a tremendous actress, and she could handle just about anything. So if that ever happened, I'd be first in line.
Okay, I think we're out of time or very close. Is there anything that we missed that you want to cover?
No, I just wanted to thank you all for coming, because, man, this room empty would have made me cry. And, I mean, I just appreciate everyone that's, you know, watched the shows and the movies and followed the work. And, I mean, we literally couldn't do it without you. I mean, like, our comic book fan base is really what has made all this possible. So from top down, all of us appreciate you and thank you, and we listen to you, too. So thanks a lot.